A few weeks back, I talked about events that led up to the First Seminole War, about Noonan's invasion attack of Painstown on Payne's Prairie. That was in 1812 and 1813. The Battle of New Orleans, the destruction 16 months or 18 months later of the Prospect Bluff or Negro Fort. So then we get now to 1817. The First Seminole War can looked upon as unfinished business from the War of 1812 of events that happened in the Southeast United States at the time. It's called the Southern United States. Louisiana, Mississippi Territory was called the Southwest, although today we know it as the Southeast. Back then it was the Southwest United States because after Louisiana, Texas was still part of the Spanish Empire. So instead of doing a linear history that many other people have done and done some good videos out there, I decided to read some of the letters that people are not that aware of that kind of led to the events. And I think this would really surprise people on some of the things that were said. They probably haven't heard this before. So the first letter I'm going to read is from the 6th of January, 1817. It's 6 months after the destruction of Prospect Bluff Negro Fort. This is from Robert Butler to General Edmund Gaines. Robert Butler is Andrew Jackson's adjutant at the Hermitage. Now, Gaines is the commanding general of U.S. troops in the Southeast, Georgia, Mississippi Territory, Louisiana over to South Carolina. He is subordinate to Andrew Jackson, who is in charge of the 7th Military District of the United States. Andrew Jackson has his headquarters in the Hermitage near Nashville, Tennessee. So Robert Butler's writing from the Hermitage to General Gaines. And let me go to that. Oh, I'm sorry, share screen. Okay. Okay. Robert Butler writes from General Jackson's headquarters in Nashville. Robert Butler is the adjutant. He also later became the first surveyor general of the territory of Florida, state of Florida. And so anyway, January 6, 1817, writing to General Gaines, he says, I have the honor to acknowledge the receipt of your note from Washington City. I am instructed by the commanding general, that's Andrew Jackson, to require that you establish a headquarters for the present at or near Fort Montgomery. Now, Fort Montgomery is in Alabama, kind of northeast of Mobile, not far from the Fort Mims area. And to remark that the measure is dictated by the policy of having your brigade in a situation to overlook Pensacola and Mobile, and if necessary, to give aid for the protection of New Orleans in the event of a rupture with Spain. The officers of the staff assigned to your command have been ordered to that point where all communications will in the future be made relating to your commands. From Robert Butler to General Gaines. Doesn't say where Gaines is stationed right yet. So that's basically looking out to make sure that nothing happens like an attack on New Orleans and Mobile like the British did. They're afraid that Spanish might cause some trouble with Mobile and New Orleans. So General Jackson still has his eye on Pensacola and Mobile and New Orleans, the same that he had during the War of 1812, which, so 5 years, well, not 5 years, 2 years, a little over 2 years earlier, which led to the Battle of New Orleans. Now, the next letter is from a man named Archibald Clark, and he is in St. Mary's, Georgia. Archibald Clark, and we'll hear his name later on in history in the Seminole War. He's studied at Litchfield Law School in Connecticut, and at the age of 16, and spent 4 years there, being one of the youngest students ever to attend. And he graduated and came to St. Mary's in Camden County, Georgia, and practiced law, acquired extensive lands on the St. Mary's River, and built a sawmill on Spanish Creek. That will be mentioned in the letters here. Also maintained some New England ties. He built a cupboard house, and which still exists. He hosted Aaron Burr after Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton when Burr was trying to get support for his separatist state that Aaron Burr was trying to establish in the southern state, but was unsuccessful with. And President Madison appointed Archibald Clark the collector of port at St. Mary's, basically a customs agent, and he was the intendant of St. Mary's. St. Mary's was considered very important at the time because it was the border town with Spanish Florida. So back then it'd be considered like El Paso, Texas, Juarez, Mexico across the border, or San Diego and California and Tijuana across the border. St. Mary's was considered the border town of the Americans, although the nearest Spanish settlement from that would have been Fernandina on Amelia Island. And Archibald Clark actually has a house that still exists in St. Mary's, Georgia. Here it is. It's the Archibald Clark house, built in the early 1800s. He was living there by 1804, and it's the oldest house in this town. So that's kind of on my list of places that I want to visit. So let's see what Archibald Clark has to say. If I can get the share screen up. Oh, I want this next letter. Archibald Clark is writing to General Gaines, once again from St. Mary's, Georgia, 26th of February, 1817. This is the type of stuff I have to transcribe while I'm in the archives. So sometimes it's not easy. He said, "Sir, in consequence of your recent and a recent and most atrocious acts perpetuated by a party of Indians supposed to be of the lower creeks in this country, in the murder of an unfortunate white woman and her 2 infant children, by which the defenseless inhabitants on our frontier have been thrown into a distressing state of alarm. I avail myself to the earliest opportunity in giving information that may be ordered on under the fullest assurance that immediate measures will be adopted to guard and prevent repetitions of such cruel and barbarous acts. On the 24th instance, the house of Mrs. Garrett, resting in the upper part of the country near the boundary of Wayne County, was attacked during his absence. Mr. Garrett's house. Mr. Garrett's gone at this point, so it's just his wife and 2 children. Near the middle of the day, by a party consisting of about 15 who shot Mrs. Garrett in 2 places and then dispatched her by stabbing and scalping. Her 2 children, one about 3 years, the other 10 months, were also murdered, and the eldest scalped. The house was then plundered of every article of value and set on fire. A young man in the neighborhood at work, having the report of guns, went immediately towards the house where he discovered the murdered family. The flames having only commenced, they were soon extinguished, and he sounded the alarm. hard to read there. The workmen near the workmen from my mill and a few others assembled to pursue, but having but few arms and not otherwise equipped, that pursuit proved fruitless. The Indians were tracked as far as uh, something venture. Uh, their course was parallel with the western branch of the Spanish Creek, which induces the belief if there being Indians of the lower tribes. On this uh, on this open, extensive, and entirely unprotected frontier, the poor and innocent inhabitants have ever been exposed to these calamities. Representative after representative to the several governors of this state of cruel and unprovoked murders in the quarter by the Indians have also been made. A momentary disposition was manifest to afford relief, but a little time, however, uh, would elapse before the alarm would subside and the subject never more thought of until again revived by an occurrence such as I have just related. To you, sir, therefore, the inhabitants of the frontier, as well as others, through me appeal for some protection, a small detachment of troops upon the head of the St. Mary's would and would be a most valuable purpose by at once, uh, I guess, shocking the invalids of the savage and preventing our abandoned and unprotected citizens from adventuring into the Indian country and driving in herds of cattle. It would give me much pleasure to hear from you, and again identified as one of those with whom you were once acquainted. Archibald Clark, intendant of St. Mary's, to Major General Edmund Gates. He kind of gives away the reason why the Indians attack when he says in the top of this page, adventuring into the Indian country and driving in herds of cattle. What's not said in the letter is why the Indians attacked in the first place. And John and Mary Lou Missel went into that in their book about Elizabeth Stewart from the First Seminole War, is that some of these Georgians from this area went down to Payne's Prairie area where the Indian had a herd of cattle and they attacked the cattle. There was three uh, Seminole or Indian braves that were guarding the cattle that the settlers killed and took off with the cattle and drove them back north of the border into Georgia. The Indians sent a party of warriors for vengeance there. Since three of their warriors killed, they would kill three white men, as in the culture that demanded vengeance. So they entered this house of Mr. Garrett and they found a kettle or a pot that had belonged to the Indians that were killed. So they supposed that this house belonged to one of the men who had killed the Indian braves. So they killed Mrs. Garrett and her two children in retribution of the Indians that were killed. So this would start off a series of raids back and forth of acts of vengeance. So that's kind of the backstory that what happened. Next, we have a letter the following, I guess about 2 weeks later, from Lieutenant Richard Sands, to Colonel King. Colonel King was the kind of the military governor in Pensacola when Andrew Jackson took over. Colonel King is in charge of the 4th Infantry. Major General Gaines is kind of the commanding general of the southeastern area. Colonel King's is under General Gaines. So from Fort Gaines in 15th March, um, I enclosed for your information two letters which I received a few days since yesterday. William Perryman's a Creek Indian friendly with the United States, accompanied by two of the Lower Creek chiefs, arrived here and informed me that McQueen, the chief mentioned in one of the enclosed letters, is at present one of the heads of the hostiles, that they are anxious for war and have lately murdered one woman and two children. So he's blaming the killings of Mrs. Garrett on McQueen. The like, he likewise says that he expects the uh, the news in George Perryman's letter is true, for there are talks going through the towns that the English will be at the Ochlockonee River in 3 months. William Perryman and George Perryman are brothers, and so the hostile Indians, or the Seminoles, under Josiah Francis, are going to meet with the English on the Ochlockonee River at Josiah Francis's village in 3 months. I have sent an Indian runner to Ochlockonee to ascertain what preparations the hostiles are making. Your obedient servant, signed Richard M. Shands, Lieutenant, 1st Infantry Commanding at Fort Gaines, Colonel William King, officer of the 4th Regiment. So they're expecting hostilities from McQueen and the Peter McQueen and the Seminoles. So next we have a letter from General Gaines to the Secretary of War. This is about 3 weeks later, April 3rd, 1817. Headquarters, Camp Montgomery. Remember, General Gaines is at Camp Montgomery. MT is Michigan territory. So he's in Alabama. Alabama at that time was called, no, I'm sorry, Mississippi territory, not Michigan. I see that M, I'm thinking Michigan. So he's in Mississippi territory. That's not the state of Mississippi. The state doesn't exist right then. Both Mississippi and Alabama are Mississippi territory. So he's at Camp Montgomery, northeast of Mobile, April 3rd, 1817, writing to the Secretary of War. And this is the handwriting that I have to suffer through for General Gaines. I received by the last mail letter from Archibald Clark, Esquire, Intendant of the town of St. Mary's, by which it appears that an outrage of uncommon cruelty has recently been perpetuated by a party of Indians upon the southern frontier near the boundary of Wayne County. They have massacred a woman, Mrs. Garrett, and two of her children. The mother and oldest child were scalped, the houses plundered and burnt. The high respectability of the intendant leaves no grounds to hope that the report of this effective catastrophe may remain at all questionable. The frequent failures of the mail have prevented my receiving this, as well as several other accounts, collaborations of the settled hostility of the Seminole Indians, until a delay of several weeks had intervened, and altogether had probably received these accounts from other sources. I have nevertheless deemed it proper to enclose there herein number 2 and 3. I have ordered a company of artillery to Fort Scott, and have desired Major McIntosh of the Creek Nation to keep an eye on the Seminole Indians. So he's reactivating Fort Scott after a few months after Prospect Bluff Negro Fort was destroyed. Fort Scott was abandoned a while afterwards. Now it's being reactivated. Arbuthnot, that's Alexander Arbuthnot, the British trader, appears to have been writ appears to have been written by one of, sorry, let's see, uh, a letter signed by A. Arbuthnot appears to have been written by one of these self-styled philanthropists who have for a long time past contrived to foment a spirit of discord among the Indians of our country and destroy them with pretended kindness. So he's calling Alexander Arbuthnot a self-styled philanthropist, to say just stirring up trouble by pretending to be kind to him. Well, the Indians aren't getting support from the Americans, that's for sure. Should you be pleased to order me to visit the Seminoles to wrest from them the murderous uh, something of the murders of our suffering women and babes, I beg you will authorize my passage by water to the mouth of the Apalachicola or the Occoquan Sound, where I will disembark and in course of a few days afterwards see their warriors and or destroy their habitations. A battalion or two of mounted men from Georgia and Tennessee can be ordered to meet me in the Seminole towns. So General Gaines, this is April 1817, is proposing to do what General Andrew Jackson would do exactly 1 year from this time right now. So it's not only Andrew Jackson's idea to do this, General Gaines is already saying it. And look what he says here. I shall this day write to Major General Jackson upon the subject, but as we have only a monthly mail from this place to Tennessee, it is not likely that he will get my letter as soon as this may reach you. So he says, why don't I go down and attack the Seminoles in Spanish Florida and burn their towns and, send me some Tennessee troops. At the same time, I'll write and tell Andrew Jackson this idea. Well, apparently Andrew Jackson liked that very idea because he did exactly that 1 year later. My quartermaster department is without funds and nearly without forage. Now, nor is there in this country any means of obtaining transportation for a regiment, the scarcity of corn having put it out of the power of the inhabitants to keep their teams fit for service. So he's asking for funds to get forage and transportation and to go on this. So it's not General Gaines's call to do this because he would have to get approval from higher up, Washington, going into another country's territory. So that will be what will be done by his commander, General Andrew Jackson, exactly 1 year later, to the Honorable Isaac Shelby, Secretary of War in Washington. So these are some very interesting letters leading up to the events of the First Seminole War. And I hope you enjoyed that, and more to come in the future.